It was a moment that I will never forget. I had just dropped my daughter off at school. I was wearing my pajamas and hiding under a baseball cap and sunglasses. I wasn't wearing a stitch of makeup. Another mom crossed the street in front of my car. She was talking on her cell phone and dressed as if she were headed off to work, or perhaps a board meeting. I had nowhere to go. I had been searching for a job for what seemed like an eternity, and I'd only had one interview with a recruiter that ended up being a dead end. I had reached out to everyone I know that might be able to help. It was in that moment, sitting in my car, that the realization hit me. I don't have a job. Why? Because I can't get one. I was completely unemployable. There's a question that I get asked every single day. How did you go from being a 17-year stay-at-home mom to being one of the highest producing sales executives at a high-tech startup in San Francisco? Fortunately, I get a chance to ask myself that question every morning when I get to work. I stroll past the ping pong table into the bright open kitchen to fill up my oversized mug of freshly brewed coffee, and I grab a Greek yogurt. I try really hard not to spill on my hoodie. And I used to think to myself, what the hell am I doing here? But today, it feels like my second home. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to the growth of the company. Only a few years ago, my life was so incredibly different. If I could change the world and positively influence our community, I would urge all companies to hire career reentry candidates and let them back in. Early on in my career, when I was 26, I was on top of the world. My career was on fire. I had just been promoted to director with a leading bank, and I was transferred to the East Coast to open up the New England region for their mutual fund company. I was a young California girl breaking into the most competitive mutual fund industry in the nation, the Northeast. My family had a word of advice for me. They said, go for 2 years, have a great time, don't fall in love. I was calling on stockbrokers. They were 99% white men that looked like my dad. I was giving multiple presentations every day, sometimes to several hundred people. And I was almost always the only woman in the room. At the time, no one was talking about women in leadership. Gender bias was not a thing. And I certainly had never heard of ageism. I simply saw it as an exciting opportunity to go out and break into a tight-knit business community and make an impact. I ended up taking that territory from 0 to 70 million in sales. Of course, like most of you have probably done at one point or another, I didn't heed my parents' advice. You ever done that? Several years later, I left my job, married a New Yorker, and moved down to Manhattan. My heart was in having a family, so we moved to the suburbs. Soon I got very involved in the community, chairing large nonprofit events and fundraisers. Many of the women that I worked with in volunteer years came out of big careers in New York. I used to joke that some of these women could plan the Battle of Normandy. But in all seriousness, some of the leadership roles I had in volunteer jobs were equally as challenging as anything I've done professionally. Working exclusively with volunteers who may or may not follow through on their job and can't be fired is not an easy task. Everything was going along swimmingly until it wasn't. During the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008, my world was shattered. You've all heard this story. Some of you may have lived it. We were crushed financially by the economic meltdown. My long-term marriage was unraveling. I was jobless, and I had a family to care for. I had 3 beautiful kids at home that I needed to feed, and I wanted life to go on as normal for them. I was living in a community of extreme wealth, living as poor as I possibly could without being homeless. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. Financial hardship is one of those challenges where you can sometimes feel your community pull away from you, which is very painful. Without the financial resources, I felt out of control to actually change my circumstances, which led to anxiety and depression and hopelessness. I knew I had to do something. Although it had been many years, I knew that I had an even stronger skill set than that 26-year-old go-getter in Boston. The funny thing about age is you don't feel different. At least I don't. I still feel like I can do anything I put my mind to. Of course, my kids, 2 of them which are here today, love to remind me that I'm not 26, especially when I leave the house in a beanie and some ripped jeans. Exactly 20 years after moving to Boston, I relocated back to California with my family. As I went to re-enter the workforce, I evaluated all of my nonprofit work in fundraising, leadership, and I used it to bolster my LinkedIn profile and my resume. I sent out a gazillion resumes, and no one, absolutely no one, returned my call. Without a lack of current professional experience on my resume, all of my nonprofit work, especially anything pertaining to schools or PTA, only made that career gap more glaring. It wasn't until I removed all of my nonprofit work that anyone returned my phone call. Shockingly, there's a study done by Lean In that shows job applicants with PTA coordinator on their resume are 79% less likely to be recommended for hire over an equally qualified candidate without children. I found this to be true. I lived it. I became that ugly statistic. It took several years of determination and several very humbling steps to even get the smallest amount of traction back into the workforce. My first job back was in a daycare center. I then spent several years doing temp jobs, everything from administration, which is definitely not my skill set, to recruiting. Eventually, I was able to find a part-time job working 20 hours a week for a mutual fund company in San Francisco. I found that job on Craigslist, of all places. As I continued my search for full-time work, I felt like the financial services industry just wasn't what it was when I first got into it. As long as I was facing an uphill battle and completely reinventing myself, in my boldest move yet, why not try tech? I went from being the only woman in the room in investments to the oldest person in the room in technology. What's in it for companies? Why should they hire career reentry candidates? This is where it gets interesting. Companies, especially technology companies, like to hire what they believe are the best of the best. Young, smart, technology-savvy employees out of the best schools. Companies that limit themselves to these candidates will underperform. Here's my case for why every company should let them back in. Number one, companies perform higher with diverse teams. Take the shoe test. next time you're in a meeting, look under the conference room table. If everyone is wearing the same shoes, whether it's wingtips, heels, or sneakers, you've got a problem. There's a lack of diversity. Diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams by 35%. Teams with an equal representation of men and women generate 42% more revenue. Number 2, companies should have employees that line up with their customers. In sales, I'm always looking at the persona of my buyer. Corporate decision makers and CEOs are oftentimes older and more experienced. The average age of a corporate CEO is 58. It's an asset for companies to have employees on all of their teams that are relatable to their diverse set of customers. Who is better equipped to get a meeting with a corporate decision maker, me or my 22-year-old son? Sorry. Number 3, aptitude is value. The primary reason that companies don't want to hire people returning to the workforce is they see them as out of date and not up to speed on the latest tools, tech tools, that it takes to do the job. I'd argue that you can teach the tech tools in 12 months or less, but you can't teach 20 years of experience. I have the wisdom to know when things go bad, it's not the end of the world. I don't sweat the small stuff. I have the experience to know what to chase and what to walk away from. I am far more connected than my 26-year-old self. And like many parents, I'm good at wearing a lot of hats. I am fit, I am healthy, I'm active, and I am just getting started. Stop listening to our culture. People only get better with age. So let me ask you this. Why wouldn't companies want to let career reentry candidates back into the workforce? There's a talent pool out there of people who've had great careers and they've left for a variety of reasons. It's a win-win for the company and for the returning employee who absolutely needs a job. They will be grateful for it, and they will work very, very hard to be a high performer to keep it. The world will change for the better, your company will be richer, and more people, just like me, will add a tremendous value if you give them the opportunity that is well earned and let them back in. I'm very grateful they let me back in. Thank you.